Hey everyone, I'm Andrew from Aurora Gameworks and welcome to a short mini tutorial video. In the last tutorial video that I made, the part 1 of our new space shooter tutorial series, I asked the question if people would like to see how I made this moving animated world grid texture. And we had a response from Jeff Kales asking, I would love to learn how you created that grid, digging the tutorial so far. Well, first of all, thank you, Jeff. And second, yeah, I said that we can do that, and that's what we're going to do in today's video. First thing that you want to do is make sure that we have a grid in our scene. What I've done here is just placed a static mesh actor into the world, and I have scaled it up a whole bunch so it takes up a very large area like this. We will need to create an opacity mask for the texture, which will create our grid shape. So let's create a new image in Photoshop just here, or any kind of image creating program that you have. We will need to create a black background, which black in the mask means that it's transparent. And then we'll need to create some white lines, which will be where it'll be fully non-transparent, as in where you'll see the lines. So I'm going to draw out a square here. I'm going to align it to the bottom left like this. And we want to have no fill. Actually, let's make sure that this is on the layer above. Let's have it so that it's no fill. We want the stroke to be white, and let's set the stroke size to something like 10. So now we have this sort of L-shaped line here. When we tile this texture all across the plane, then it'll create a grid pattern. So with that created, now we just need to save it as a PNG file and import it into the project. So now with our grid mask texture in our project, we're going to want to make our new material. I'm just going to call this animated grid. Right now, create a material instance, just called animated material inst. We can now go and apply the inst to our plane mesh, and then whenever we make edits into our master mat, we can see those changes happen in the scene once we apply our changes. So now let's go into our animated grid. So inside our material graph, first we're going to change our blend mode and shading model. We want it to be translucent and unlit. So now we can start on getting grid texture into here. So whilst holding down the T key, click, and now we have our texture sample here. I'm going to come into here and just type in grid. So going into our texture sample UVs, we want to get our texture coordinate, and we want to plug that into a multiply, which here we can use a scalar parameter, which you can put into the graph by just holding the S key and then clicking. We want to use this as our grid size number. We plug that into there. Let's just use a value of 16 for now. And now we want to go from our multiply, and we want to put in a panner. This is what is going to drive the movement of the grid. So into time, we want to simply get time. And on our speed, we should get a vector parameter. Now, this vector parameter, which contains 3 floats, is what's going to drive the speed of the panning. So we plug that into speed. For now, we can just do, we want alpha to always be on 1, and if you think of RGB as X, Y, Z movement, then that makes this a whole lot simpler. So for now, we're just going to have it move constantly in one direction. So now with that, we can connect our panner into UVs, and let's just connect that into our opacity and see what that looks like. As you can see here, we now have a sort of grid shape moving, it's panning. So next thing that we actually want to do now is we want to be able to define what color our grid lines are in. So let's disconnect that for now. So let's just drag off of red, and we want to get a multiply, and plugged into B we want to get another vector parameter. This will be our grid color. So we plug that into our multiply, and I'm just going to make the color, let's have it a slightly unsaturated light shade of blue. Then we can have another control that we can control from our inst, a scale parameter which we can just call brightness. We plug that into another multiply, and as default we can just set that to 1. So now that we have our grid color and our brightness, we can connect these into our emissive color, and then we'll just have the red channel on its own into our opacity. And now you can see here in our preview that we have our bright pale blue lines scrolling up with the translucent grid. Now, if you want to, we could technically leave the tutorial here, but to make it like the one that you saw in the previous video, we need to add in a few more, slightly more advanced features. So something that you might have seen in the last video was that we had the opacity of our grid sort of taper off to the edges. But to get this effect, we're going to have to do a little bit more into our graph, because you see here we don't quite have that effect yet. And to do that, basically we're going to use a bunch of linear gradients to alter our mask. So back in our graph, if we just unplug these for now, and if we go back to our text chord, we want to drag off here again, and we want to get a linear gradient. We want to drag out a power node, and I like to set this to 2.2. That's what I have it in the other project. And we want to have another one come out of our U gradient, except before connecting it in, we want to have it appear on the other side. So before connecting it into base, we want to actually do a 1 minus. This will flip it. And with our V gradient, we can do this one more time just by copy and pasting that and connecting our nodes such like this. And now we basically just need to blend these nodes together. So on our top 2 powers here, we can just multiply these together, and then with that we can once again multiply them like this. The only downside here is that our final result here is that it's a lot darker than what we really want it to be. So we can then use another multiply, and I found that if you just multiply it by 10, we get the brightness back that we're looking for. And now we need to apply it to our sort of final output. So grabbing off of our red channel here from our like grid mask texture, we want to have a multiply. We want to put our output from before down here into B. So if we plug that into our opacity and then plug our emissive color in, apply that and head back into the level, you see now we have that kind of feathering. However, what if you wanted to have a fill color to get that effect that we can control from inst? We want to use a switch parameter, or here it says static switch parameter, but we have that there, and let's just call it grid fill. We want these to be going into our emissive color and our opacity. Now, since we already have our logic for what we want it to look like without the grid fill, then we can just already plug in what we already have into false. And then for our true statements, we want to use more of the mask gradient that we just created before. And for our opacity, we want to drag off of here. We want to get a multiply again. Just create a static vector, and we want to set it all to white. This is so then the color that we add into the grid won't actually be cut out by the mask. It means that it's not a full transparent anymore. So then with that, now what we can do, drag off of color sort of line here from where we had our brightness, and we can add an add node, plug in that into true, and for our second input here, we want to get a multiply, another multiply from this multiply. Yeah, I know. We want to connect that into B, and then connect this into B. But then with that, what we can do is define a grid fill color into this node input here. If we get a new vector parameter, let's just call it grid fill color, hook that in, and if we set it to a color like red, now you see in our result here we have that color. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The last thing that we can add real quick is a multiply going into our opacity. Create a scalar value to be put into our B input. Call this main opacity. Set the default to 1, and then that means from our sort of like inst version of it, we can define how visible or not visible the grid is overall. So cool, now with all that done, we can go back into our scene here, and if we open up our instanced version, see here if we toggle on and off grid fill, it now appears in that sort of gradient pattern that we set. If you find that red to be too intense, we can just change the value, make it a little bit darker. You can set it to different colors, make it very subtle. We can change the grid color, and we can even change the panner speed. So I could set the green to 5, and now it goes really quickly. Or you could do something real trippy and have it go on a sort of angle like that. We can change our grid size, and that making the value lower will make the grids larger, and making the grid size higher will make the grids appear more dense. And here we have our main control to set how transparent or visible we want the grid to be. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you, Jeff Kales, for the tutorial request. I've been Andrew from Aurora Gameworks. Make sure to subscribe to keep up to date with our latest tutorial videos, and to see our next space shooter tutorial video when that comes out. That's pretty much it. Have a good day, everyone.